Hey friends, with the War Within just a few weeks away and the pre-patch just a few days away, I decided now is the time to go ahead and make this video talking about which character I intend to main in the War Within and how I'm intending to prioritize the alts that I'll be playing. As I have spoken about before many times, you guys should all know that I'm going to be maining a tank. I'm actually planning to play all of the tanks to some degree in Season 1 of the War Within. So I'm going to, in this video, talk about each tank in the order that I'm going to prioritize them, starting with the lowest priority and moving towards the highest one. And then at the end of the video, once we've talked about all the tanks, I'll talk about what I mean by prioritizing each one in the different levels that I'm going to prioritize them and what kind of level of effort I want to put in on each of the tanks, starting Season 1 and throughout it. So, starting off with number 6, to no one's surprise, this is going to be the Protection Paladin. The reasoning behind me eliminating Prot Paladin from my consideration as the main pretty early has a few different factors to it. Just right out of the gate, my guild has a lot of Paladin mains. I think we have 3 people who want to main Ret Paladin, and 1 person who wants to main Holy Paladin heading into the War Within. And so just the need for another Paladin on top of that from a raid leader perspective is just really not there. And we're going to have plenty of bops, we're going to have plenty of immunities, and bringing that to the table as a paladin is not a priority. That doesn't necessarily eliminate it from consideration, but some of the other factors are the playstyle for Prot Paladin is not my favorite. I really don't enjoy Holy Power as a resource, and that's kind of the core mechanic that makes Paladin play and tick. And I mean, when you compare Holy Power to like Rage or Energy or Runic Power, I don't find it a fun mechanic to mess with. And while I can definitely enjoy it in small doses, if it was my main character, I think it would be a pretty big point of frustration for me in the long run. In addition to that, I just don't really like the hero talents for Prot Paladin. I think Lightsmith has a lot of potential to be incredibly strong, but the playstyle of just like constantly buffing someone in your party and like having to track when people's cooldowns are up is not something that I want to be focusing on when I'm tanking, and especially when I'm raid leading. And Templar, on the other hand, just, I don't know, I played with it on the beta and I just didn't enjoy the talent tree. It didn't feel like it was very impactful, and that's something that could change with tuning, but like just the nature of it just didn't really move the needle for me. I will say I do think Prot Paladin has a high chance to be the meta tank for Season 1 if it gets a few adjustments, especially to Word of Glory healing, but also just to its damage output. Prot Paladin's toolkit is very strong, especially in a Mythic Plus context, and so if you're looking at this from the perspective of which tank is going to be best, Prot Paladin should probably still be on your list, depending on how tuning goes, because it very well, with its toolkit, could end up taking over the meta spot like we saw in Season 1 of Dragonflight. Next up, coming in at number 5 for me, is going to be the Vengeance Demon Hunter. A few things to say about Vengeance. Playing with Season 1 or even pre-season gear just doesn't feel great. The loss of secondary stats going from like a Season 4 build into a fresh expansion build is most noticeable on Vengeance out of all the tanks. You have low crit, which means you have a low parry chance. You have low versatility, so all the incoming damage is higher. You have low haste, most importantly, which means you're going to have lower demon spikes up times. You're going to have bigger windows of time where you don't have active mitigation up. And when Vengeance doesn't have active mitigation up, it typically has to either kite or die. The kind of integral part that kiting plays in Vengeance's tanking is not something that I've ever enjoyed. And I feel like, just based on my testing with Vengeance, it's going to be necessary in some places, especially with fortified keys in some of these dungeons. And I really don't enjoy when I have to like kind of hop in, get my defenses up, build some threat, and then leap away to survive. I don't know if that's actually going to be how it plays out, but I'm a little bit concerned that it might be based on how low secondary stats are, at least in testing on the beta. A couple of other things that kind of turn me off from Vengeance are the amount of like ground-based effects that you have to play. I know there are other options for using sigils, like you can have at-player macros, or there's even a talent that just casts it at your feet or at your target, but it's more optimal to be able to place them on the ground, and you have to do that with so many Vengeance abilities, including core rotational abilities like Sigil of Flame, that it just kind of drains me as I'm trying to play the tank, and I don't really enjoy doing that. On top of that, the hero talents for Vengeance I just don't like. Aldrachi Reaver is probably going to be pretty strong from a damage output standpoint, but I just don't like the the nature of that talent tree. I really didn't like playing with it. And Fellscarred, well, it gives you kind of buffs to your Metamorphosis and kind of turns meta for Vengeance into more of a DPS and defensive cooldown hybrid option. It just wasn't my favorite that I've played with. In fact, if I rank it compared to the hero talents that the other tanks have, it's very near the bottom of my list for both of Vengeances. I will say, on the positive side about Vengeance, it is still the strongest tank in terms of being able to control mobs. Even though you don't have 2 charges of things like Sigil of Chains and Sigil of Silence and Sigil of Misery, you still have 1 charge of all of them, plus Chaos Nova. I think Vengeance still brings a lot of mob control to the table, and that's still a very good strength of the class relative to the other tanks. The gap has been closed, but if the tanks are balanced in a way where like tank death is not going to be a serious limiting factor in keys, I think Vengeance is still going to be a very strong option considering all of the control that it brings to the table. It'll feel bad not having 2 charges of all those sigils, but you still have 1 charge, and that's already a lot more than most of the other tanks have available. Moving on to number 4, for me this is going to be Guardian Druid. I have always been a fan of the bear. Druid is like my original main in World of Warcraft, although I mostly played Resto in vanilla. I just really like playing Guardian. It's got a very simple rotation compared to some of the other tanks, which I think is actually helpful when you're playing new content and when you're learning how to pull the new dungeons and how to fight the new raid bosses and all of that. I also think that actually being able to play Lunar Beam as a talent for once with the Elune's Chosen hero talents is very fun. Lunar Beam is a super strong ability that's really cool to be able to use. It hasn't always been tuned to the point in the past where it was even a potentially viable option, and getting to play with it on the beta has been a true blast. Druid of the Claw also has some potential. I think cat weaving in raid could be really fun and rewarding, but I am still skeptical about how well that's going to play out in Mythic Plus, especially if you're trying to do a decent level of pushing when mobs are actually dangerous. I know you still retain a lot of the benefits of bear form when you shift into cat form when you're playing Druid of the Claw, but I think losing any of that defensive ability may just make you fall over and die real fast. In the Guardian Druid video, I went on kind of a long rant about how I feel about the talent trees, and I stand by my points that I made in that video, but I also think at the end of the day, once you get Guardian Druid into a dungeon and actually play it, it feels really good and really strong. It's frustrating not to be able to pick some of the talents that you really feel like you should include in your build, but the end result is a tank that's actually much stronger and much more survivable than a lot of the other tanks, and really feels fun to play. I do hope that we get some, maybe like a mid-season or season 2 look at the Guardian tree and also the class tree. But if Guardian Druid goes live as is right now and there's no real tuning adjustments, I think there's a high chance that it is the meta tank for Season 1. And it feels really weird to say that, and maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe that prediction will fall flat on its face. But I think Druid is in a really good spot right now as far as actual in-game strength. So if that's something that you're considering, then this may be a tank that you want to pick up. Also, if you're new to tanking, I still think Druid is probably one of the best choices to start with. It does have a simplified rotation compared to a lot of the other tanks that I mentioned earlier, and it really gives you a chance to get into the game, figure out how to tank, and also just be able to focus on control and focus on learning the dungeons, learning the content, and it gives you a really good intro to tanking in World of Warcraft. Moving into my top 3, at number 3, and this is a fair distance behind number 2 and number 1. Number 3 is going to be Brewmaster Monk. Some really positive things that I have to say about Brewmaster going into the War Within. The simplified toolkit and reduced button bloat that it has are absolutely fantastic changes to the spec. Not having to use weird keybinds like that I would normally have a mount or a profession on some of my other classes as core rotational abilities on the Brewmaster feels really good. The removal of some of the offensive CDs, while a little bit painful, still love you Bone Dust Brew, does make setting up your burst windows feel much less cumbersome, and overall the strengths of the spec are still in place. Stagger is still an incredibly strong mechanic, even though I think the stagger levels in the gear that we have on the beta right now are a little bit low, but I think with some gear scaling, I'm hopeful and a little bit optimistic that that'll change going into the raid and into actual seasonal keys. And I will say, this is a character that very well, we'll talk about this more later, but this could end up being my raiding main, depending on what my guild actually needs me to run. I'm trying to not let that impact my decision too much, because I'm having way too much fun and I think that I'm going to have it number one. But I do think Brewmaster is in a really good spot heading into the War Within, and I think the hero talents that it has are really good. Master of Harmony is super cool. I love the way that it gives you offensive potential out of using Celestial Brew. Shadowpan still needs a big tuning pass. I think either letting you get more stacks of the buff that you're building up, or reducing the energy spent requirement to spend those stacks would be kind of necessary to make it feel satisfying and make it feel like you're not wasting the stacks that you build up all the time. I also want to say about Brewmaster, the updated talent trees are in a very good spot. Both the class and the spec tree feel really good with the updates that they've had. And then I think the last thing I'll say about Brewmaster is that it's always been one of my favorite specs. I really enjoy playing Brew whenever I settle down and get into a gaming session, but it's just not quite up there with the top 2 tanks for me right now in the beta. Moving on to number 2, this is going to be the Blood Death Knight. I feel like I have endless good things to say about Blood DK. This is definitely going to be my primary alt, and I'm going to try and put nearly as much focus into it as I do into my main in Season 1 of the War Within. But just some highlights: grips are always good. Having Death Grip, Gorfine's Grasp, Abomination Limb, just being able to move mobs around the battlefield is always fun, and it gives you a sense of control that outshines all the other classes from a positioning standpoint. Blood's self-sustain is honestly like pretty legendary at this point, and it's still very, very strong in the War Within. You know, being able to be in full control of your own survivability as a tank is a feeling that we all love. Even if you're giving your healers heart attacks sometimes because of the ping pong nature of your health bar as Blood DK. But knowing like, hey, I can take up to like 1 health less than a one-shot in damage and I'm going to be fine because I can just heal it back myself, is always just a fantastic feeling. Other good highlights for Blood DK: the buffed Gorfine's Grasp is almost on par with Sigil of Silence now. You do have to put 2 talent points into it, but you can not only have a Gorfine's Grasp a lot easier in its position in the talent tree, but you can also have a silence attached to it for all of the mobs that it grips. It is a shorter silence than Sigil of Silence at the baseline, but having an AoE silence as a tank is really, really good for helping control mobs and pulls within Mythic Plus, and also within raids whenever you need to reposition adds on a raid boss. The talent tree updates that Death Knight received, both on the spec side and on the class side, are simply amazing. These are 2 of the most well-designed talent trees now, and I think the rest of the classes should get the kind of attention that Death Knight got going into the War Within with updates to their talent trees. Both of the hero talents for Blood are in a pretty good spot. Sand Lane was nerfed to the point where it's not head and shoulders above the competition anymore, but I think it still is a pretty fun hero talent tree to play. Deathbringer is actually starting to shine a lot though, and I think the new ability that you get from it, Reaper's Mark, is a really satisfying button to press. Also, just the way that the rest of the talent tree buffs your damage feels really good. You can get a ton of Blood Boil damage and Blood Plague damage out of this tree. Overall, I just don't have anything bad to say about Blood DK heading into Season 1 of the War Within. I think it's a fantastic choice for anyone out there who wants to maybe be a little more challenged than some of the other tanks, because, you know, with the ability to keep yourself alive that Blood has comes a level of responsibility that some of the other tanks don't necessarily have for keeping yourself alive. But if you want to meet that challenge and also play a tank that has kind of unparalleled movement control over mobs in a dungeon, I think Blood is just a fantastic choice, and it's one of my, well, obviously it's one of my top 2 picks for tanks in the War Within. Out of looking at this from a perspective of like which tank is the most fun to play, which is what this list is intended to be. Moving on to number 1, if you've been tracking along in the video, this is pretty obvious, and if you've been following my streams lately and listening to me chat about this class, also going to be pretty obvious. Number 1 for me is going to be the Protection Warrior. Simply put, Prot Warrior has been the most fun tank for me to play throughout the beta cycle. I love both of the hero talent trees. Mountain Thane is my absolute favorite of all of the hero talents that I have tried. Just the visual, I mean, maybe this is just on brand, right? I mean, my handle is Thor and my channel branding has lots of lightning in it, but getting those lightning strikes coming down all around you and getting rage every time one pops and then getting a big satisfying chunk of extra damage and just feels super, super fun. The visual feedback is fantastic. And honestly, the Colossus tree is pretty great too. Demolish is a really fun button to press. Having this kind of alternating phases where you're like building up to your next demolish, your damage is increasing, and then you hit the button and just have this huge chunk of damage sent out feels really satisfying. It's on a short enough cooldown that you don't feel like you're waiting for an eternity to hit it again. If I had to pick my two favorite hero talent trees, they might very well be Mountain Thane and Colossus for Prot Warrior. I like them that much. I also just love the mobility that Prot Warrior has. There's a level of difference compared to, like, Brewmaster and Vengeance are obviously more mobile as tanks, but the abilities that Prot has to move around the battlefield between charge and shield charge and heroic leap, and also just having a little bit of extra movement speed built into your talent tree, just are really, really satisfying and fun ways for me to control my character in the game. Obviously, we have to give a big shout out to Spell Reflect. There's going to be plenty of opportunities in Season 1 to get off huge Spell Reflects for big damage and nice survivability. And it's on such a short cooldown that, like, you can use it every, like, 24 seconds. You can use it pretty much whenever you want to. It's just a fantastic ability. Other highlights for me for Prot Warrior are just the defensive toolkit that it has. You feel like you have a defensive ability available for every little thing that comes up, even if it's just a demo shout. But then you also get really good cooldown reduction on Shield Wall. Last Stand is such a strong ability. Already talked about Spell Reflect a little bit. Just the toolkit that you have, in addition to just the power that block has early in a season, and even late in a season if you play Prot Warrior on live keys right now. Warrior's defensive toolkit is really satisfying and probably my favorite out of all the tanks. Prot Warrior certainly has its weaknesses. If there's a big tank buster that is not blockable, you can be susceptible to one-shots to that. If there is sustained heavy magic damage or heavy bleed damage, then a lot of your, kind of baseline ability to deal with damage is ignored. And those can be points of frustration. And honestly, like, from that perspective, I'm not sure Prot Warrior is going to be the best tank. I'm not sure that it's going to be the meta tank. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it's not. But it is going to be my favorite tank. And that's what I'm really trying to get at in this video and what I'm really trying to land on. So we've talked about all 6 tanks in the order that I have them. Once again, I want to stress that this is the order that I enjoy them in, not the order that I think they're going to be strongest in. So I want to spend a little bit of time at the end of this video to talk about kind of how I'm looking at prioritizing these tanks. Like, what do I mean when I say Prot Warrior is going to be my main character? Well, I mean that I'm going to level it first, and I'm going to focus primarily on gearing it up. If I get to the point where it is kind of fully geared out, I'll start spending a little bit more time focusing on gearing my other characters. I do want to treat Blood DK as kind of like a primary alt and spend a lot of time and attention on it as well. Prot Warrior and Blood DK have almost opposite play styles, where like Prot Warrior, you're just blocking and preventing a lot of the damage from happening in the first place. Blood DK, you're just kind of taking it to the face and then self-healing it all back up. And I think that contrast in play styles is something that I really enjoy, but when I'm looking at, like, which 2 tanks are going to be my top 2. But so kind of looking at my top 4, I'm going to level Prot Warrior first. I'm going to focus on gearing it up first, but I am also going to level at the minimum, assuming I have enough time for this, Blood DK, Brewmaster, and Guardian before Season 1 starts. Blood DK and Prot Warrior are the 2 that I want to have, like, fully geared out in, like, the best gear that we can get with time permitting before the season actually starts. And then for Brewmaster and Guardian, maybe we'll try to shoot for, like, having dungeon gear at kind of whatever level we can get. I'm probably not going to do a lot of the, like, outdoor rare farming and camping that we did in the preseason of Dragonflight on those classes, but I'll at least do that on my Prot Warrior and my Blood DK, time permitting, of course. And then once the season actually starts, looking at Prot Warrior being my raiding character, if there is a scenario where, like, we absolutely have to have a DK in the raid, and we don't already, so that we can have grips to move ads in a certain fight, then I'll at least bring my Blood DK in for that fight. Depending on how fast we're progressing, maybe I'll bring in my Blood DK for most of progression, but I'm looking to try to focus on my Warrior as my raiding character. Brewmaster and Guardian are kind of in like a tier below those two, and for them I'm trying to, at least I'm hoping that I'll be able to do like a full vault each week. Maybe not like a full raid vault and keys, but at least get the 3 options so that you can take tokens and sockets if needed, and at least do enough keys so that if one of them becomes more enjoyable, like let's say Guardian gets a rework in the middle of Season 1, like Paladin did in the middle of Season 1 of Dragonflight, and Guardian becomes the meta tank, and it's just an absolute blast to play. I want to have it in a position where I can kind of pick it up and run with it, and not really feel like I have to do a lot of refarming of other stuff. But we're definitely going to start off with the Warrior being the main character, Blood DK being the alt, and then Brewmaster and Guardian being kind of like characters that I'm going to play on a weekly basis, that I'm going to try and put in, you know, as much effort to keep them up as I can. But if they fall behind a little bit, I'm not going to be too sad about it. For Vengeance Demon Hunter and the Prot Paladin, they're definitely going to be a tier below everything else. I'm probably not even going to get them leveled before the season starts. Depending on like how much there is to do before the season starts, we may end up at least getting them up to level 80, but I'm not really looking to put any effort into gearing them before the season starts. And you know, at some point in the season I'd like to get them in the like weekly rotation of doing a key and getting a vault, but they're going to be pretty neglected moving through the season. If you made it this far in the video, tell me down in the comments which tank you are looking to play, or which character or class you are looking to play if you're not a tank. If you're not a tank, thank you for watching this whole video. I really appreciate you hanging out. Please be sure to give the video a like and give the channel a subscribe if you want. We do have memberships available now if you want to do that, and then join the Discord server to get a role. I'm still working on what's going to be like offered for memberships, but if you want to support the channel in that way, I would really appreciate that. If all you want to do is watch, I really appreciate that too. And I value you just as much as a viewer as I would anyone who chooses to become a member. And thank you all for watching and for hanging out, and I hope to see you guys in my streams, and I hope to see you guys in the War Within. Until next time, farewell.